The emergence of Muslim nationhood in South Asia stands as one of the most consequential political transformations of the 20th century, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of the region and leaving a legacy that continues to shape the lives of over 1 billion people. What began as a cautious demand for minority safeguards within a united India gradually evolved into the two-nation theory, an ideological framework that would ultimately lead to the partition of the subcontinent and the creation of Pakistan in 1947. This transformation did not occur overnight. It was the product of nearly a century of intellectual labor, political maneuvering, and social upheaval that progressively constructed a distinct Muslim political identity, effectively sidelining the composite national consciousness that had characterized South Asia for centuries. The colonial context provided the structural conditions for this transformation. Following the Indian Revolt of 1857, in which Hindus and Muslims had united against British rule, the colonial administration recognized the danger of such solidarity and deliberately shifted toward a policy of divide and rule. The British began to preach that Hindus and Muslims were fundamentally separate nations, and they institutionalized this distinction through the Morley-Minto reforms of 1909, which introduced separate electorates for Muslims. These administrative categories, initially designed to manage imperial subjects, would eventually harden into political identities that demanded sovereign expression. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan occupies the foundational position in this intellectual genealogy. A scholar and reformer who initially advocated Hindu-Muslim unity, Syed Ahmad Khan underwent a profound transformation that would influence generations of Muslim leaders. The catalyst came in 1867, when Hindu leaders in Benares launched a movement to replace Urdu, the language of the Muslim cultural and administrative elite, with Hindi. This episode convinced him that the two communities could never join wholeheartedly in any political enterprise. As historian Hector Belither observed, Syed Ahmad Khan was the first to realize that mutual absorption was impossible, that Hindus and Muslims must eventually part ways. He became, in Belither's phrase, the father of all that would ultimately happen in Muhammad Ali Jinnah's mind. In 1875, Syed Ahmad Khan founded the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, later Aligarh Muslim University, creating an institutional base for Muslim modernist education that would nurture future separatist leaders. His political philosophy rested on several premises that would later form the foundation of the two-nation theory. He argued that Muslims and Hindus constituted distinct nations with separate cultural, religious, and social identities, that democratic majority rule would permanently marginalize Muslims in a Hindu-dominated India, and that Muslims required separate political safeguards to protect their interests. These ideas directly influenced the formation of the All India Muslim League in 1906, which initially sought political representation and separate electorates, rather than outright partition. The philosophical elaboration of Muslim nationhood reached its most sophisticated expression in the work of Allama Muhammad Iqbal. Iqbal's own evolution mirrored the broader transformation of Muslim political consciousness. From the author of Sari Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, his experiences in Europe between 1905 and 1908 exposed him to the destructive potential of territorial nationalism, as he witnessed how European nationalism led to militarism, colonialism, and the devastation of World War I. This led him to develop a complex critique of Western-style nationalism, while simultaneously articulating an alternative Muslim political identity. Iqbal distinguished between Qawm, a nation based on race, language, or territory, and Millet, a religious community transcending geographical boundaries. While he criticized territorial nationalism as idolatrous and contrary to Islam's universalist vision of the Ummah, he recognized that Indian Muslims required political self-determination to preserve their cultural and religious identity. His presidential address to the All India Muslim League in Allahabad in December 1930 marked the crystallization of his political vision, when he declared that he would like to see the Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, Sindh, and Baluchistan amalgamated into a single state, self-government within or without the British Empire. The formation of a Northwest Indian Muslim state appeared to him to be the final destiny of the Muslims of Northwest India. This address became the foundation stone for Pakistan, though Iqbal himself envisioned it as a step toward broader Islamic unity rather than an end in itself. The political journey from minority rights to nationhood was neither linear nor inevitable. The Lucknow Pact of 1916 represented the high point of Hindu-Muslim political cooperation, when Muhammad Ali Jinnah, then a member of both Congress and the Muslim League, successfully negotiated an agreement where Congress accepted separate electorates and one-third representation for Muslims in provincial councils. This pact suggested that Muslim political aspirations could be accommodated within a united Indian framework. However, the subsequent decades witnessed the unraveling of this compromise. Communal violence became increasingly frequent in the 1920s and 1930s, convincing many Muslims that coexistence in a united India was impossible. Economic and cultural anxieties compounded these fears, as Muslims worried that Hindus, dominant in trade and industry, would control economic resources while leaving Muslims marginalized. The friction over language, particularly attempts to replace Urdu with Hindi, further sharpened the divide, as did Hindu campaigns for cow protection that challenged Muslim customs and hardline Hindu nationalist vilification of Muslim historical figures. Guyana's transformation from the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity to the Quaid-e-Azam of Pakistan illustrates the final crystallization of Muslim political demands. Returning to leadership of the Muslim League in the 1930s after a period of political dormancy, Guinea became convinced that Muslims required more than just safeguards. They required nationhood. In his presidential address at Lahore on March 22, 1940, he articulated the mature two-nation theory, declaring that Islam and Hinduism were not merely religions, but entirely distinct social systems, making the idea of a unified Indian nation unrealistic. Hindus and Muslims, he argued, had fundamentally different religious philosophies, customs, literature, and historical inspirations. They did not intermarry or share communal meals, highlighting their separate civilizations. The Lahore Resolution formally demanded independent Muslim-majority states, marking the transition from seeking protections within India to demanding sovereign territory. This emergence of Muslim nationhood necessarily involved the marginalization of alternative visions of Indian identity. Communist and socialist movements advocating class-based solidarity across religious lines were progressively marginalized as communal polarization intensified. Regional and linguistic nationalisms were subordinated to religious identity, a tension that would eventually lead to the separation of East Pakistan in 1971. Most significantly, the concept of composite nationalism, or Muttahida Qawmiyat, championed by Islamic scholars like Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madani of Deoband, was defeated by the logic of partition. Madani had argued that India's diversity made it a single nation where religious difference did not preclude political unity, maintaining that Islam was compatible with territorial nationalism. This perspective, which represented the views of many traditional Islamic scholars, was ultimately overwhelmed by the political momentum toward partition. The mechanics of mobilization reveal both the achievements and limitations of the Pakistan movement. Critics argue that the demand for Pakistan represented elite-driven aspiration, rather than the genuine will of the common Muslim masses. The All India Azad Muslim Conference, representing Islamic scholars who opposed partition, advocated for one nation of all Indians against British rule, suggesting significant Muslim opposition to the two-nation theory. Nevertheless, the Muslim League successfully mobilized mass support through literary and poetic campaigns. Religious authority from sympathetic scholars, and direct action, including the catastrophic Direct Action Day of August 16, 1946, which resulted in the Calcutta riots, killing thousands and displacing hundreds of thousands. The partition of 1947 realized the two-nation theory in state form. But this creation contained inherent contradictions that persist to the present. Iqbal himself had criticized Western nationalism as idolatrous and contrary to Islam's universalist vision, yet ultimately endorsed a territorial state for Muslims. The concept of the Ummah, transcending geographical boundaries, collided with the practical necessities of state formation in a specific territory. This tension continues to shape Pakistan's identity politics. Caught between Islamic universalist aspirations and territorial nationalist reality, the emergence of Muslim nationhood in South Asia demonstrates that nations are not primordial entities but political constructions forged through specific historical circumstances. The two-nation theory operated as both a colonial construct and a civilizational challenge, created by British institutional frameworks, but given ideological content by Indian Muslim intellectuals and politicians. The creation of Pakistan represented both the triumph of Muslim political aspirations and the tragedy of partition, leaving a legacy of displacement, violence, and enduring rivalry that continues to define the subcontinent. Understanding this history requires moving beyond simplistic narratives of inevitable conflict or British manipulation to recognize how structural conditions, intellectual creativity, political strategy, and mass violence combined to forge a new nation from the complex tapestry of South Asian identity.